You all can be seated. I have always loved movies that have a twist ending. The kind of movies that make you want to go back and immediately watch the same movie over again. Now, I know he is no longer terribly well loved because of the whole Airbender Avatar Last Airbender debacle, but one of my favorite writers and directors is M. Night Shyamalan because he built his whole career on this type of movie. And I love his movies because these twist endings they don't just surprise you at the end, but they change the whole story. They make you realize that what you thought you were watching at the beginning is not really what was happening. And maybe the best example of that is The Sixth Sense. Now, I don't want to spoil this movie for anyone, but it came out in 1999, so if you haven't watched it yet, that's on you, and I'm going to spoil it. This movie is about a small boy who can see dead people and a child psychologist who is trying to help him understand his gift or his problem, depending on how you look at it. And at the very end of the movie, you find out that the child psychologist who is talking to this kid has been dead the whole time. Now, if you go back and watch it again, it's like you're watching a completely different movie. Conversations land differently. Silences are suddenly meaningful. And moments that felt confusing make perfect sense. It's the same exact story, but once you know how it ends, you realize you have been missing something the whole time. Now, we just sang, love is the power. Love is my weapon. Love is a resurrection, and there ain't no grave gonna hold my body down. That is a bold statement. It is full of conviction, and it is defiant. And it names something deep in us that badly wants to believe that death does not have the last word. And in a moment like that, when our worship team is singing it and we are all here celebrating resurrection together, it's easy to feel it, to feel the excitement and the hope and the wonder of it. But then here pretty soon, after feeling that feeling, we're going to go back home. We're going to go back to real life. And it's not always as easy to feel the excitement or the hope or the wonder of it all. There is shame that clings to our deepest hurts. There is fear that keeps whispering worst-case scenarios in our ear, and there is disappointment when things don't turn out the way that we had hoped they would. And eventually, there is the reality for each of us of death itself. And somewhere in the gap between what we just sang and what we actually experience, a dissonance starts to build up. And if we're not careful, that dissonance, that tension can start to shape us, can start to form us. It can make us cynical. It can make us guarded. That tension can make us feel differently. It can make us turn into the kind of people who stop expecting anything in our lives or in the world around us to change. That tension can make it feel like it is not worth the long, slow work of following the way of the cross, not worth the long, slow work of following the way of Jesus. And instead, we just try to go around Jesus. We do things our own way, and we do things the world's way. And that's where I find the struggle is on Easter morning, because it is one thing to say and to sing, love is the power that will lift us out of the ground. And it is another thing to actually believe it. It is another thing entirely to bet our lives on it, especially when the evidence around us feels uncertain at best. And that's the position that two of Jesus' disciples found themselves in on the first Easter morning, walking back to their home in Emmaus from Jerusalem. We're going to start out in Luke 24 this morning. While two of Jesus' disciples were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" And they replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel." But we had hoped. You can hear in that one line not just a small disappointment for them, but the collapse of an entire way of seeing the world, the collapse of their hopes and their dreams and their expectations for the future. They had hoped that Jesus would redeem Israel, that he would be the one to set things right, to bring victory, that he would be the one who was finally going to make sense of the pain and difficulty of their lives. But instead, Jesus was humiliated. He was murdered. He was buried in a borrowed tomb. And for them, this didn't feel like a small setback. This felt for them like the end. The kind of end that makes you question everything, not just what happens next, but what everything that has come before it meant in the first place. Most of us who have lived long enough know that feeling. But we had hoped. That's what we say when life doesn't turn out the way we thought it would. We had hoped that the relationship would last. We had hoped that the diagnosis would be different. We had hoped that things were going to turn out a different way. But Jesus doesn't leave his disciples there. He meets them where they are, and then he starts to move forward with them. We're going to be in Luke 24 again. Then Jesus said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. Now I want you to notice what Jesus does and does not do here. Jesus interpreted to them. Jesus does not immediately fix their situation. Jesus does not undo the crucifixion. Jesus doesn't magically fix all of their confusion and their doubts and their problems. Instead, Jesus interprets for them. Jesus reframes their story. He begins to show them how the events that they have experienced, events that may have felt random or meaningless or like a terrible tragedy to them, that even those events can be taken up into something larger that God is doing. That God can reach back and redeem even the worst part of what feels right now like a devastating loss. Because the resurrection does not change what happened. It changes what it means. Jesus took everything that they thought was failure and begins to reveal it as part of something bigger. What looked like the end was, in fact, for them about to become a turning point. But even after Jesus interpreted for them, the disciples are still walking in confusion. They're still carrying disappointment with them. They're still convinced that their story has ended in loss, even as Jesus is right there with them, explaining, reframing, opening the scriptures. They don't recognize him, even though Jesus is there. Just like in the famous poem, Footprints in the Sand. You know this poem, right? Someone is talking about their walk with Jesus, and they look behind them and they see two sets of footprints in the sand where they and Jesus walk together. But at the hardest times in their lives, They only see one set of footprints, and they look back and they say, Jesus, why, when I needed you most, is there only one set of footprints? And Jesus answers, sand people always ride single file to hide their numbers. Hold on, that's the wrong poem. They don't know it yet, but Jesus is with them the whole time. And because Jesus is with them, things begin to change. We're going to read the end of the story from Luke 14. When Jesus was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were open, and they recognized him. Their eyes were open, and they recognized him. This is when the story starts to change for the disciples, when they recognize Jesus. This is where they start seeing things differently, where the reality of Jesus' resurrection begins to work backwards through their story and starts to change how they see all of the events leading up to this point. C.S. Lewis helps us to name what's happening here. In a couple of his books, he describes a reality where, in the light of eternity, the meaning of our lives is not just static, it's not just carried forward, pristine and unchanged into some heavenly future, but instead it is transformed. In the Chronicles of Narnia, he calls it death working backwards. The idea is that when the story is revealed in all of its fullness, even the things we experience as loss or failure or suffering are not just ignored, they're not just forgotten, but they are taken up into something greater so that their meaning is changed from the future into the past. Not that the past didn't happen, but the ending reaches back and changes, reshapes what the past means. The resurrection doesn't change what happened, it changes what it means. And this is what Jesus is doing for these disciples. He's not changing what happened, he is revealing what it meant. And just like the twist ending of a good movie, you cannot unsee it. And you begin to realize that the story you thought maybe was a mystery or a tragedy was in fact something else entirely. And that is why Easter matters. The resurrection is not just the thing that happens after the crucifixion. It is the moment that makes sense of the entire story. So when we talk about the resurrection, what we mean is that the ending, life and love and redemption, reveals the kind of story that we have been living in this whole time. The resurrection does not erase the past, it redeems it. It does not deny suffering. It refuses to let suffering be meaningless or final. It means that even now, before everything is resolved, we are living in a story that ends in redemption. And if that's true, then even the hardest moments of our lives are not signs that we are living in a tragedy, but they are just moments whose full meaning we have not understood yet. The resurrection doesn't change what happened. It changes what it means. So if it's true that at the resurrection, death itself begins working backwards and transforms all of life that came before it, then our job is to live in the light of the resurrection, which means to live without fear, which means to live without shame, which means to live without regret. And to do that, we need to learn to see. There's a writer named William Stringfellow who talked about learning to look for what he calls tokens of resurrection. These are not huge and dramatic miracles. These are not undeniable proof of the reality of God. These are tokens, small, ordinary signs that life is breaking through in a world that so often feels marked by death. He says that discerning those signs means learning to see the remarkable in common things, learning to recognize that even in the middle of confusion or grief, even in the middle of the routines of our ordinary lives, God is still at work. It means being honest about the reality of death, but refusing to let death have the last word. So I encourage you to pay attention. Look for the ways that resurrection might already be present. Look for the ways your story might already be moving towards life, even if you don't understand it yet. This all reminds me of a story that the monk Thomas Merton, who is known for his insightful writings about the spiritual life, tells in one of his books. He talks about standing on a street corner in downtown Louisville on a completely ordinary day. People were walking by, people were going to work, people were getting ready to eat. They were just going about their normal lives. And all of a sudden, he said it was like something opened in him. And he began to see the people around him differently. And he realized that he loved them, not just in some abstract, distant way, but in a real, tangible way. And he described it like this. He said it was as if they were all walking around shining and radiant and filled with a kind of hidden glory. And he had this overwhelming sense that there were no strangers, only people that we haven't learned to see yet. So today, as we celebrate the resurrection, look around you. Keep an eye out for tokens of new life, because the resurrection doesn't always change what happens in our lives. But if we let it, it can change what our lives mean. Would you all join me in a word of prayer? Good and gracious God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this opportunity that we have to remember and to celebrate and to look for tokens of your resurrection around us. God, we thank you for this body of believers gathered together with us. We thank you for your Son, who taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen.